TFA fam, welcome in. Appreciate you rocking with us. It is Sunday Night Football, so we are taking the first look at Week 9 waivers. Kev, you are up first. Real quickly, we do have bye weeks back again in Week 9, the Steelers and the 49ers. So definitely keep that in mind as you're making your waiver ads this week. Kev, kick us off with the quarterback streaming options for Week 9.
Yeah, this list is going to look a little bit similar like it did last week, and thankfully all of them hit the ones we had on here. But here they are again. Bo Nix at the top, at 25% roster, had himself a monster day against the Panthers, completing 28 of 37 for 284 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also rushed 5 times for 4 yards and another touchdown, finished with just about 30 fantasy points on the week. Now this week, the Broncos actually get another phenomenal matchup against the Ravens defense that has allowed the most passing yards, third most passing touchdowns, and the third most fantasy points to quarterbacks. So Bo Nix is starting to enter himself not just as a streaming option, but more so as just a must-add player to continue to look at playing because he has just played phenomenal, and he's also getting there on the ground. So really love Bo Nix. Next up is Matthew Stafford. Welcome back, Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. Stafford had easily his best game of the season against the Vikings on Thursday Night Football. He completed 25 of 34 passes for 279 yards and 4 scores, which is good for 25 fantasy points. This was the first time all season that Stafford has eclipsed 16 fantasy points. Obviously, having his 2 best wide receivers in the league, 2 of the best wide receivers in the league, is going to provide a bump. With both wide receivers healthy, Stafford enters back into the borderline kind of QB1 discussion, depending on matchup. So I do think Stafford is a play here against the Seattle Seahawks. Next up is Aaron Rodgers. Well, I get it. Rodgers hasn't been great this season. He's had one of the worst schedules for fantasy quarterbacks. He's faced a murderer's row of defenses that yielded more than He's faced a murderer's row of defenses that haven't yielded more than 23 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks in every single week but one. So this is about to change, though, this week with the matchup against the Texans, who have allowed the 10th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. And then after that, they face the Cardinals and Colts, who have allowed the 4th and 5th most fantasy points, respectively. So I do think better days are ahead for Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, getting Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson, I think, is big. But I do think there are better matchups ahead for this offense. So I do think Aaron Rodgers is somebody that you can look at playing this week. And then next up is Jameis Winston, roster in 3% of leagues. They get the Chargers this week. Welcome back to fantasy football, you beautiful bastard, because, we've been calling for it all year. We finally get it. Today, he threw for 334 yards and 3 touchdowns for 24 fantasy points. The entire fantasy community has been begging for the Browns to turn to Jameis Winston, and he delivered in a big way. And that being said, I don't think he's an obvious streaming option against the Chargers, who have allowed the 9th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. But I do think much better days are ahead for this offense. So I do think Jameis is an option. Other than that, I think you could have a look at maybe like a Daniel Jones, possibly Derek Carr if he's able to return. Because if Derek Carr was able to return this week, they would get the Panthers, which is obviously a great matchup, and he would be bumped probably ahead of Jameis Winston for me. And then lastly would be Trevor Lawrence. But we might want to walk slowly on that one because they had quite a few injuries today at the wide receiver position, which we'll talk to about when we get there.
Yeah, speaking of injuries, kind of a weird week for running back ads because somehow, some way, the running backs keep coming through unscathed, and it's been the wide receivers that are just getting fucking murked left and right all season long. But I just want to start off with saying for kind of just waivers in general, but specifically at running back, just to be paying attention to your league to see who your league mates are dropping. I know it's easy to go in, see who you picked up, and then you keep it moving. But especially with bye weeks coming up and injuries and all these sort of things, pay attention to who your league mates are dropping. I did just want to throw that out there as a PSA. The only must add I would consider for this week, and that even comes with an asterisk in and of itself, is going to be Isaac Guerendo. The Niners are on bye week next week. We have Jordan Mason left with his shoulder injury again. He's been bothered by it for the past couple of weeks. So we really just need to pay attention to see basically the big elephant in the room here is CMC's return, right? If CMC is coming back, Isaac Guerendo obviously loses a ton of his luster. But I mean, it would be interesting to see if Jordan Mason is going to be out for any extended period of time. So we kind of just need to take that one with a grain of salt and see what happens. You're likely not adding Guerendo unless you have deeper bench spots or, your roster is just in such pristine condition that you can afford to hold on to him to see what happens. But that's definitely something we need to pay attention to just to see what ends up happening with that situation. Other than that, this is really just going to be a week to add handcuffs. Not like I said, with not having any like true must adds, this is kind of be one of those weeks where if you have a spot that you've kind of been rotating at the end of your bench, that you're just picking up handcuffs at this point. And this is kind of the time of the year where I will look to do that and add some of these high value handcuffs to my roster. Braylon Allen's going to lead off the list. I was a little surprised when I looked at Yahoo and ESPN. Only 37% roster on Yahoo, even lower on ESPN. It's down to 25%. I'm sure in most competitive leagues he's rostered, but you definitely want to keep an eye out to see if he is available. To me, he's one of the most valuable handcuffs in all of fantasy football. Outside of that, we're looking at guys like Ray Davis, Ty Chandler, Jalen Wright, Blake Corum, Trey Benson, Kamani Vidal, Justice Hill. Justice Hill isn't a traditional handcuff, but he's definitely someone who should be rostered. He's going to be someone you can feel better about plugging in if you feel like the Ravens are going to be trailing. But in situations where they're not, it's obviously just going to be the Derrick Henry show. The guy that I'm most intrigued by on this list is going to be Jalen Wright, just because of his skill set and the offense that he resides in. Obviously, Achane has already been banged up this year with a concussion, missed some time last year. Raheem Mostert is not getting any younger. So really only going to take one injury there for Jalen Wright to jump in. And if you look at some of the more advanced metrics, he has been more impressive than the other two on fewer carries as well. So Jalen Wright would kind of be the guy that I think could end up being a league winner if things were to, I mean, I was about to say go right. Not necessarily go right, it'd be more go wrong for the Dolphins if one of those guys get injured. But if he gets his chance at extended opportunities, he has that league winning potential.
Yeah, I think just a couple of names you could add to that list would be Roshan Johnson. I mean, we're basically seeing him playing a pretty decent role within the offense. Obviously, DeAndre Swift has been phenomenal. Had another really big day today. But Roshan would be somebody you could look at because Khalil Herbert really has been an absolute zero, really the last month of the season. So
Healthy
I
scratch today.
yeah, so I definitely think Roshan is, but also another name maybe that we could look at is Keaton Mitchell. I don't know if it doesn't have to be a pretty deep league, but he did get his 21-day practice window opened. Justice Hill, I mean, while he's had a couple good games this year, hasn't been anything phenomenal. But obviously, Derrick Henry is still the man there, but Derrick Henry is still not going to be a player who's going to see a massive workload every single week in terms of just snaps and opportunity. So Keaton Mitchell could be somebody like down the stretch we could take a look at here. It's kind of a deeper league stash if you wanted to do so there. So just want to mention those two names. Now let's move over to the wide receivers. And a couple of these guys are kind of like what you were mentioning, like Josh Downs. I was actually surprised to see Downs only rostered in 47% of leagues on ESPN and Yahoo. Downs once again had a big day, hauling in 4 for 109 and a score for 22 fantasy points. He's now scored 15 or more PPR points in 4 or 5 games this season. And he should be rostered 100% of leagues. I really don't know why he's only rostered in 47% of leagues. I checked both sides. I was just really surprised that Josh Downs was sub 90%, honestly, with how well he's played within this offense. I mean, he is a borderline wide receiver 2 at this point every single week. So next up, same boat here, Cedric Tillman, rostered 19% of leagues. Again, obviously, I do bet I would expect in competitive leagues he's probably been picked up after last week, but if he hasn't, because he's only rostered 19% of leagues, Tillman saw his 18 fantasy points in week 7 and added 28 fantasy points this week. He was targeted 9 times. He hauled 7 of them for 99 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's now been targeted 15 times over the last 2 games. It's clearly one of Winston's favorite targets. He should be rostered in much, much higher percentage of leagues at this point. Next up is Keon Coleman. Same boat as Josh Downs. Kind of a surprise. He's only rostered in 41% of leagues, but he is rostered in 58% of ESPN leagues. The rookie wide receiver is now stacked 2 solid weeks in a row after securing 5 of 7 targets for 70 yards and a score for 18 fantasy points today. He is a very obvious wide receiver add as he should continue to build on his strong performance over the last 2 weeks. Next up, Jalen McMillan, much like Coleman, much like Downs. I find it hard to believe he's not rostered in most competitive leagues, but if he's sitting out there, he should be rostered. While it wasn't a monster day for the rookie wide receiver, he was targeted 7 times. You should continue to see a strong usage moving forward with Chris Goddard on the show for the year, and Mike Evans likely out till week 11 and week 12. Next up, Parker Washington is only rostered in 1% of leagues, and the Jags were absolutely hammered with injuries today. Brian Thomas left with a chest injury, though it does sound like Brian Thomas does have a shot to play again next week. It doesn't sound as serious as the others, but Christian Kirk left with this game with the arm in a sling, but it was reported after the game that he will miss the rest of the season with a broken collarbone, as well as Gabe Davis also left with a shoulder injury as well. meaning Washington could be in for a big bump and opportunity. He saw 4 targets and hauled in 3 of them for 46 yards. As you remember last year, especially down the stretch of the latter part of the season last year, Parker Washington was getting some pretty big run with that offense and the slot. And so I think that's where Parker Washington's going to mix in. And he has shown some ability to produce there. So I think Parker Washington is definitely somebody you should definitely be looking to add. I think he's like I said, he's rostered less than 1% of leagues. So he's going to be somebody that I definitely would be looking to target. Next up, Michael Wilson. Wilson caught 5 of 6 targets for 31 yards and a touchdown. While Wilson hasn't shown much of a ceiling to this point, he has scored double-digit fantasy points in 4 of his last 6 games, and he has found the end zone in 2 of the last 3 as well. So Michael Wilson, I think at 12-team leagues and above, definitely should be rostered. Rashad Bateman. Bateman obviously didn't have a big day, although he could have had a much better day had he not lost a long pass in the sun. Either way, Bateman needs to be rostered in more leagues just because he is continually seeing strong passing usage, especially in an offense with Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. Staying on the same theme as the Browns, Elijah Moore has been targeted 18 times over his last 2 games and has scored 10 and 16 fantasy points the last 2 weeks. He was second behind Tillman in yardage and appears to be the chain mover option as he had 5 first down conversions today. As long as Winston remains the QB, Moore is more than worth an add in PPR formats. Ricky Pearsall, the 49ers obviously are on bye, so this is more of a stash, but the first round pick should carve out a bigger role as the season goes by. He has seen at least 9 targets of the last 2 weeks with Ayuk out. Jennings, though, should be back after their bye, but still, Ricky Pearsall definitely should be rostered. And then lastly, this is more of a dart throw, but John Mechie's only rostered 1% of leagues. The Texas wide receiver room is pretty bare right now with Nico Collins and IR for at least one more week. And now Stephon Diggs went down with a non-contact knee injury. Now, it was after the game, Miko Ryans didn't really offer much other than they said it was unfortunate and they're going to have to run more tests on Stephon Diggs. So right now we'll have to wait and see. But generally speaking, when you see those non-contact injuries, it's almost likely it's a torn ACL. But hopefully that's not the case with Stephon Diggs because this team is extremely thin at wide receiver. But Mechie did see 4 targets once Diggs exited the game and could be a viable flex option. At the very least, whether Diggs has a significant injury or not, I highly doubt he plays on Thursday, which is only a couple days away. So I think John Mechie, maybe Robert Woods could be somebody you look at, but John Mechie probably makes the most sense. But remember, after this week, once we get to week 10, Nico Collins is able to come off the IR. So this is not a long-term thing here for one of these guys because Nico Collins should be back. It's reported that he should be ready to go as soon as the first 4 weeks are up. So I do expect Nico Collins to be back soon. Next up, Jalen Coker and both Xavier Legette both had decent days today. I will say that Bryce Young didn't necessarily have a completely awful day as what he was before, but it still wasn't a banner day whatsoever. But it was against one of the worst defense, or one of the best defenses in the league in the Broncos. But it sounds like more and more likely that Deontay Johnson could be moved. That sounds more likely why he actually didn't play this week. As you know, whenever he was asked, the head coach was asked about this, Dave Canales. And he kind of was coy about it, basically saying, maybe that's why he was benched this week. So both of those guys at least have opportunity in front of them to be able to see targets. And then, like I've already mentioned, guys like Noah Brown, Joshua Palmer, Trey Palmer has a 12.5 yards per reception right now. He should be somebody you could look at. Raheem Jarrett is also another player who saw like 3 catches today. Sterling Shepard left with a little bit of an injury. Xavier Hutchinson, Kayshon Boutte are all just guys you should be monitoring.
Wrapping things up with the tight ends, it was apparently a national tight end today, and the tight ends actually came through. We had a bunch of big time performances out of the position. For the streaming options, doesn't look great for week 9, just because there are a bunch of situations that are kind of up in the air. To kick things off on that note would be somebody like Will Dissly had 7 targets today that tied the team for the lead with J.K. Dobbins. He went 5 for 41 on those. Last week, he went 8 for 81. Gets a matchup against the Browns, who are middle of the road against tight ends, but are likely going to be without JOK at linebacker. That's going to be a big absence. So he's in the streaming discussion. But on the other side of that, we have to realize that they have been without a bunch of their wide receivers as well. So it's really going to depend on how many of those guys come back. But with how well Dissly has played over the past couple of weeks, he's still going to be in the streaming conversation. Next up, Taysom Hill, Foster Moreau. I know not everyone can plug Taysom into their tight end position. Even if you can, you kind of know what you're getting with him. He's going to be that big boom bust option. he's either going to give you 6 points or you're getting 26. There's really no in between there. It does sound like Derek Carr could potentially be coming back in week 9 as well. Jawan Johnson left this game with a concussion, did not come back. So assuming he's out, Foster Moreau is going to be in the streaming discussion as well. They get a matchup against the Panthers, who are giving up the 5th most fantasy points per game, 2 tight ends heading into this week. And then they proceeded to give up 85 yards and a score to Adam, MF, and Troutman. So they are both in the streaming discussion. Noah Fant going to get a matchup against the Rams, who have allowed the 2nd most points to tight ends. He's definitely a consideration. Did not have a great day today. Went 3 for 22, but they really weren't able to do anything, the Seahawks, that is, offensively through the air or on the ground. So this is going to set up to be a little bit better of a matchup for them. So you can look at Noah Fant if you would have to. On the other side of that, Colby Parkinson, the Seahawks have actually allowed the 8th most fantasy points per game coming into this week. A lot harder to trust here with Kupp and Puka back in the fold. But regardless, like I said, this matchup should be a fun one to watch. Tyler Conklin is going to be thrown in here. He has scored in back-to-back weeks. That's really all you can ask for whenever you're looking at streaming tight ends. The other one I didn't list on here, but it's something to pay attention to, would be Mike Gesicki. Had a big day today, but obviously the absence of T. Higgins played a role in that. So we're going to have to see what happens with him before we really recommend him as a streaming option for week 9.
Yeah, the other one that you guys could mention would be, I don't think I saw Hunter Henry on there, but he's only rostered in 39% of leagues. But Drake May left the concussion, so now I don't know how excited you'd be to play him, because Drake May, if he's able to miss, if he misses this week, it's not probably as exciting to play with Jacoby Brissett, who just continue. I mean, has been bad all year. He wasn't terrible, I guess, today, but wasn't great either. So. But yeah, I think that's pretty much the list. I mean, we kind of got away without a bunch of major injuries so far. I mean, there's a few that we have to monitor. Obviously, Christian Kirk, we know, is out for the year. Christian Kirk really wasn't something that we were really all that, really that excited about for most part this year. And then Stephon Diggs could be the other big one, which I think conversely, I think that's actually, huge for Brian Thomas. Brian Thomas now, I think, is just kind of a locked in top 15 wide receiver rest of the season, in my opinion. And then I think that obviously, and Ingram is huge for him. And then obviously on the flip side of that as well, and the other, if Stephon Diggs is out, and it does look as bad as it does, and if he was to be out for the rest of the year, obviously that's just great news for Tank Dell and Nico Collins, who'll be back in another week. So that being said, I think that's about it so far. Hopefully we don't get anything over the next day and a half, because we have the rest of the second half of this game, 49ers, Cowboys. Then we have the Giants and the Steelers, who are on bye after this week anyway. So that being said, keep it locked in here. We'll be back again tomorrow. You should see the kicker and defense streaming video dropping tomorrow morning. And then we'll have our must starts sits of the week at running back and wide receiver as well. So keep it locked in here. We will see you guys on the next one. Have a good rest of the week. Let's get those dubs. Bye.